Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Savvy Cast. This is Jamie, and I'm thrilled that you're here, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. Today, I'm going to talk to Tom West, who is the owner of River West Cattle. It is about 1 hour from Birmingham, and it is a farm where they raise grass-fed, hormone-free, antibiotic-free cattle to sell to consumers. And I'm thrilled to have him on because I'm very curious about and interested in buying meat from a local farmer. So he's going to share with us all of the details. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Tom West to the Savvy Cast. Tom, thank you so much for being on the Savvy Cast today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, Tom, I want to dive in to talk all about your farm and your beef, but I always start the podcast with an icebreaker. Same question for everyone. What would you choose as your last meal?
Boy, I don't know what I would pick for my size, but I'd certainly start out with a big old porterhouse beefsteak, maybe some potatoes and gravy and maybe a biscuit. That's probably not the healthiest way to go, but if it's your last meal, it doesn't really matter.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, that sounds like a meal I might ask for as well. I love beef and I love good beef. And just an interesting side note, Tom, I grew up back in the day when 4-H was a thing.
Sure.
And my dad was a county agent, and he would buy the steers and he would feed them and train them. And then I would show up on like rodeo day, which was not a good idea. One year when we had a very mean steer that butted me all around. Literally, I think it was the Montgomery Coliseum where we were, and it was horrible. But I thought later, I didn't ever see the animal until the day of the show. So I have huge respect for those of you who handle them because they are creatures and they have minds of their own sometimes.
Yeah, they do. You never really know what to expect.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Tom, your farm or your business is River West Cattle. Can you tell us, let's say you've been doing this for 10 years, correct? And tell us how you got into this business.
Well, I really kind of got into it by accident. I had the farm already, and then I retired from my other business, and I started just growing hay to begin with. We did that for a number of years, and my son was practicing law in Talladega, and he became aware of a gentleman that had passed away, and the estate was selling some of his cattle. And so we decided we'd get into the cattle business. Mm-hmm. And so we've just kind of grown from there. We started out with 15 head, and we've kind of grown up to about 100 mama cows now. And that's pretty much where we want to stay. That's a good number for us. Our farm can maintain easily that number of cattle. Mm-hmm. And, so over the last few years, we've just gotten interested in the grass-fed business, and we've incorporated that into what we're doing now.
Okay. Well, I want to define some terms for those who may not, and I don't even know all of the correct terminology. But when you say you have 100 mama cows, so we have mama cows that are female, then we have the steers. Is that right? Can you tell us what's what, who you eat? Who's just there to make the babies and all of that?
Sure. Well, when I call them mama cows, they are the mothers of the calves. And of course, we keep them on the farm as long as they're producing. And so they may stay with us 10 or 12 years while they're producing calves each year. And then we take the girl cows, which we call heifers, and we keep the prettiest ones and grow them into mama cows, and then we will sell some of the heifers also. And then we keep the select number of the boy cows, which we turn into steer cows. And
boy cows when do they become steers?
Well, after they're castrated, they become steers.
Oh, so until they're castrated, they're boys, little boys.
Yeah, well, they're still little boys, but they're not totally intact after they on steers.
Okay. So heifers are always female,
That's right.
and the males are steers, and the steers once they're castrated. And do you only eat the steers? Are those the ones that, or do you ever sell females for steaks and beef?
You can. In fact, there's a lot of that done in Europe where they tend to sell more of the female cows as they get older, but not as much here. But yes, people do eat a lot of the female cows too when they get a little bit older. Typically, you like to slaughter your cows before they get 3 years old. There are some people that do that. I personally am just doing steers, but there are people that do both.
Is there a difference in the meat, the flavor? What would be a difference in the male and female?
Well, if you don't castrate the boy cows and you sell bulls, they tend to be tougher if they're not made into steers. But there's not really a lot of difference between the female cows and the steers as far as the quality and the taste of the meat.
Okay. And you keep the females as long as they're reproducing?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, just out of, and I grew up on a farm. We have a hunting farm. So this to me is just a normal question, but how are they slaughtered? What is the process?
Well, the way we do it is, we keep our cattle on the pasture, on the farm, until we get ready to process them or take them to the slaughterhouse.
Okay.
And then we have appointments set up. And it's gotten really hard to get appointments. You have to do that about a year ahead. And so we take them on a weekly basis. I'll take 3 at a time to the slaughterhouse. And they'll slaughter them there and do the different cuts that people prefer. Some people want thicker steaks or variety of cuts. They'll hang them for 2 weeks in the slaughterhouse before they cut them up. And then I'll go back in 2 weeks or 16, 18 days and pick the meat up and deliver it to the individuals.
Oh, so it goes straight from the farm to the slaughterhouse and the processor to the consumer. You already have them sold.
That's
they don't
correct.
go. Oh, okay. So that's as fresh as it can get, other than if you killed your own.
That's right.
Okay. Now, are the slaughterhouses? I have lots of friends who are big hunters, and they take like the deer. They'll take it. They call it the processor. Is that the same? Are they one and the same?
Some of them do both. Some processors do both deer and cattle, but some people just do one or the other. But they can be done at the same place, but they have to be done. You can't do a deer and then do a cow right behind it. They have to be done separately.
So where you take your animals, it's only beef, steers. It's only that kind of meat.
Well, I take mine to 2 different places. And one place just does cattle and pigs.
Okay.
One place does cattle, and they also do deer.
Okay. Well, Tom, what I want to ask you, because I know that you said, let's say you've got 500 acres and you're bordering the Coosa River. That is beautiful territory there. And you say, or it says on your website, that they are on a rotational grazing in October. And then you even specify the grasses: fescue, ryegrass, and bahia grass. Bahia. Okay. And then you say 2 months in January and February on hay. Now, is hay the same? This may be a dumb question. Is hay the same as like grain or corn?
No. The hay is just bahia grass is what I feed, is bahia hay. It's just cut off of a different field that they don't graze on. And so it's cut during this time of year when things are growing and stored in the barn. We have that little short period of time where really nothing grows in Alabama. Everything's, January and February, nothing's growing. And so we've got that period of time where I have to supplement their food. And so they're eating basically the same thing they eat in the summertime. It's just been cut and stored in the barn.
Oh, okay. So it's all grass. There's no grain.
All grass.
Okay. So can you tell me, because, and by the way, I will, just a little backstory. The way I found you is your son, Matt, who was practicing law. I guess he's still practicing law. I'm not sure, but he married one of my best friends, and they're great friends of our family. And when I found out that you were in this business, I was like, oh my goodness, I want to share this with my listeners, viewers, especially the local ones, because recently it was actually, I think 3 weeks ago, I was reading about a shortage of meat. We're in very precarious times right now with food and prices and all of that. So, I definitely plan to order some meat, but I wanted to have this conversation with you first because I'm just going to be honest. I am going to have to adapt to a fully grass-fed flavor. There's a little sweetness that you get from the grain and whatever, but then I know there are people who will only touch grass-fed. Can you talk about the difference in fully grass-fed, the flavor versus that of animals that have had a little grain?
Well, of course, the main difference in those two types of meat is the amount of fat that you have in the meat.
Right.
Whereas grain-fed tends to have 50% more saturated fats and a greater amount of just regular fats than grass-fed does.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, you have to cook it differently. You can't put grass-fed. If you're one of those guys that loves to barbecue and loves to get a really hot fire and throw that steak on there and, really sear it, you have to change your attitude a little bit with grass-fed because it doesn't have as much fat in it. So you have to cook it a little more slowly. And that maintains the juiciness in the steak. And if it's cooked properly, they're very similar in taste. You really can't tell that much difference in them if the grass-fed is not overcooked.
Okay, so if you were going to cook a grass-fed steak, say on the grill, how would you cook it? Just on a lower temp, or would you marinate it in some type of healthy oil? What are some ways to make it easier to cook?
Well, first off, yes, you do want to cook it on a lower temperature. You can put it on for the first minute or two and sear it, but then you want to cook it off the direct heat at maybe 25% less temperature than you would on a grain-fed steak.
Mm-hmm.
And that will maintain the juiciness of the steak, whereas if you put it in on too high of a temperature, the steak will get tough and chewy. But if it's cooked properly, they're both delicious.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Now, can you tell me, because I'm looking on your page, and there's several ways that you can order or that someone can order. Now, first of all, you do deliver within 100-mile radius of your farm, which you said basically encompasses most of Birmingham. Is that correct?
It's a 60-mile radius from my farm. So it'd be 120-mile diameter from my farm.
Okay.
Yes.
So almost anyone in the Birmingham, the suburban areas, we could get meat from you and it's delivered and it's straight from the farm. I mean, from the processor. Okay.
That's true.
Okay. So I'm going to where it says shop in the products. So you have free delivery of quarters, halves, and wholes. So I'm looking at a half beef. Okay. So a quarter. And the prices are very good, in my opinion, for what you're getting, $4.25 a pound. And if you get a quarter, does it vary based on the size? Like if it's a smaller cow, it's going to be a quarter is going to cost less than if it's a larger cow, or do you have some sort of set parameters for how much?
It's based off the hanging weight of that steer. So yes, it will vary depending on how big or small the steer is. And that's why we give a range in there of the weights. But it will vary from steer to steer depending on the hanging weight. And that's basically the dressed weight, if you're not familiar with hanging weight, and some people are not.
And dressed weight, that would mean it's trimmed and it's packaged. I'm not sure that I know what that is.
Oh, okay. Well, the hanging weight is like if you've seen a lot of these movies where you see the steers hanging up on the hook, that's a hanging weight. They haven't trimmed anything off except he's been disemboweled, the head's off, the skin's off, but they have not trimmed the excess fat off yet. It's just basically the carcass hanging there. Mm-hmm. That's the hanging weight. Mm-hmm. And so we multiply that number that the processor gives us by $4.25 for a quarter. And that's the part that the customer would owe us. And
Oh.
it is trimmed a little bit more once they start cutting the meat off. Of course, they trim it a little bit more,
Hmm.
but that's the number used for the price.
Okay. Okay. Which honestly, uh, currently right now, because I shop a lot, I'm in the grocery. I go to all the different, Whole Foods, Fresh Market, Sprouts, Publix. 425 is a very good price, even on a good day. I mean,
Well, we like to think it is.
I mean, that's at least right now the best I've ever seen it is Fresh Market's Chuck and Chicken, and it used to be $2.99 a pound just on Tuesdays. Now it's $3.99 a pound, and you're not, of course, getting fully grass fed or straight from the farm. I don't assume, but okay. So very quick, briefly, just tell me for those who might want to buy. It comes straight. It's not been frozen, and is every a cut of meat wrapped separately and labeled? How does it come packaged?
It does. Of course, it is frozen when I deliver it.
Oh,
They,
okay. Well, that's okay. That's
they
good for
freeze it.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, they freeze it at the processor. I
Okay.
pick it up. It's frozen, and then I carry it from the processor to your home or
Okay.
wherever you would like to have it.
Okay.
But for a person that buys a half or a whole, you can choose how you want to get it cut. Now, if you get a quarter, then you have to get, what I choose, because somebody else has got to buy that other half of that side.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get a half or a whole, you can choose how you want it cut, how you want your steaks cut or your roast or whatever you like. And then I just pass that information on to the processor. And so it comes basically how you want it. You can choose how many steaks you want to have it per package, the size that you want your roast, such as that. But if you get a quarter, then I typically will do a 1-inch steak, and I do 2 to 3 pound roast and 1 pound hamburger meat or ground beef.
Oh,
1 pound.
okay.
That's normally how I do it.
Oh, okay. Now, if someone wanted, let's say, a half or a whole, that's now, and I have freezer. I'm a big freezer. And of course, no one would want all of that meat delivered fresh. You would have to freeze it,
Right.
So that's great that it's already frozen. I would say for a half steer, would you not need at least a fourth or a half of an upright freezer for all of that meat, or is it a little more compact than that?
Well, you need 8 cubic feet for a half, 8 cubic feet of freezer space.
Okay.
And so that is basically a half of an upright
Yep.
freezer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I use as a ballpark. If you want a whole steer, you're going to need an upright size freezer to get it in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So some of the, and do you have a lot of people who go in together, maybe neighbors or friends, and they'll buy a whole steer and then they will divide it?
A lot of people do that. In fact, most people do that. I've had very few that kept the whole steer themselves. Most people go in together and then split it up themselves. That's exactly right.
Okay, I had another question here. Okay, so you're going to have all of the cuts because it's based on the biology of a cow, of a steer. You're going to have flat iron. Is that correct? You're going to have a flat iron or a flank. You're going to have all those different cuts. You're going to have filet or beef tenderloin. You'll have the tri-tip. You'll have the rump and the chuck. I mean, any cut that you would find at the grocery, you'll find because it's a whole. Is that right? Or
you'll have that particular meat. It's because it's part of the steer. Now, if you bought a quarter and I end up cutting it, it might not have a particular cut of steak that you wanted, but of course the meat will be in there. It might just be cut a little differently than you had in mind. But now, if you get a half, you can have it done exactly like you want it. But you will get, if you get a quarter, you get 25% of that steer, all parts.
Oh, and here on your website, you show you've got the steer and you have all the different parts. That's very helpful.
Right.
That's super helpful. Okay. And then you also, and I think this is wonderful, you have a beef box where it's 20 pounds. Now, what is involved in the beef, or what's inside the beef box?
Well, the reason I did that is some people either, one, don't have a freezer, or they're hesitant to buy a quarter or a half without testing the beef.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided to come up with a smaller package, and that is it's ground beef, it's steaks, and it's roast. And it's just a variety of those cuts so that people can test the beef. And then maybe next year they'll want to get a quarter or a half, or next spring, I should say.
Okay, that is great. Now that's honestly, that's a very good gift too. You know, those men that you can't find anything for that they're
Yeah.
going to get excited about. This beef box is awesome. This is great. So Tom, before we this has been so helpful. I mean, I think this is a fabulous opportunity for at least my people around here to buy beef that you know is clean, that you know where it came from. What are some of the maybe recipes or cuts? I mean, we've all had, and I call it hamburger meat too, but ground beef, we all know about that. We've all cooked roast. What are some of those uncommon cuts that maybe we ought to think about learning to enjoy? And I'm going to ask you, are the organs included? I have not fallen in love with liver.
I'm glad you reminded me of that. That's one of the big differences in grass fed as opposed to grain fed. Is that grass fed, the organs are all good because they're not processing chemicals and things that are oftentimes given to grain fed, and our organs are no good. So yes, you can get liver, which many people love beef liver. And I have a lot of people that want the hearts, and people have tongues. I'm not particularly fond of any of those, but a lot of people love the internal organs. And so, yes, they are available on grass-fed beef. And to answer your other question about types of beef, I do want to mention that the ground beef that you get from a grass-fed is phenomenal. You have very little shrinkage on grass-fed beef because there's not a whole lot of fat, so it doesn't shrink down much. You don't have much grease. So the ground beef is one of my favorite cuts of the whole cow with this grass fed. And of course, it's so simple for a lady or a man cooking dinner. Just grab a bag of that ground beef out of the freezer, and there you go. You make your spaghetti or tacos or whatever you want to do. So it really simplifies life. But to get to your question, I'm not a real cook. So for me, there's nothing better than a good steak on the grill. Just like the first question you asked me, I just that'd be what I would choose. Would be a good steak. Now I have made a few roasts. I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah.
I'm not too good. I'm not the one to ask about the favorite recipe.
Well, I understand. My husband would be the same way. Bless him. He's great at many, many things. Cooking is not one. So it's good that he's married to me in that regard. Well, yeah. I am so grateful that you shared all of this. Is there anything that maybe I did not ask that you think everyone that might consider buying would want to know or need to know about, time frame or, a limited availability or anything that would be helpful?
Well, I typically sell beef at 2 times. I sell them at the end of the fall, like right now, and then I sell them in the early spring. And so we're just about sold out for the fall. We have a few steers left, but then we'll have some more in the spring. But I would just encourage people to look at my website at riverwestcattle.com or go on Facebook. Juliana, your friend, has been wonderful to help me with the Facebook. I'm not real computer oriented. Like I almost missed the show because I couldn't get it turned on.
That's okay.
But
yeah,
one of those 2 things will enlighten on any questions they might have.
Okay. And I will put all of the contact information in the show notes. So basically, if we want to get it for the fall, we've got to get it pretty quickly. Otherwise, it'll roll back around in the spring.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I'll be getting my plans together. And Tom, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for what you do. And I just wish you the best in all of your future endeavors.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, you have a great rest of your day, and all of you watching and listening, thank you. And until next time, have a fabulous day.